We are back on the Rational Boomer podcast. Hopefully, your day is going well. It's Wednesday. Busy night last night. Of course, we had the New Hampshire primary. Not a lot of surprises, but some stuff to talk about. So hang on for that. Um, my wife and I, as I've told you before, we go out to dinner a lot. And I got a bit of a surprise today. I was talking to my brother, and we went by his house because we were down in the area. And we decided to go out to dinner with my brother. His wife's out of town. He had his grandkids and daughter with him. And we went out to a place I haven't been for a long time. And frankly, if you said, hey, let's go to this place, I probably would have said, no, I don't really like chain restaurants that much. Anyway, it was close and we had to make a quick decision and we went to Cracker Barrel. Now I'm going in there thinking, oh, it'll be all right. It's just like any other chain restaurant. But I got to tell you, man, that shit was good and it was a lot of food. Walked out of there way too full for my own good. Had the fried chicken and some other stuff. But man, that was surprising. That was surprising. I also want to tell you, so Cracker Barrel, they're not paying me, but it was pretty fucking awesome. I was impressed. Anyway, the reason I was down in the area of town where my brother lives is because I had a doctor's appointment. Now, this thing pissed me off. I get a call from my eye doctor because I had cataract surgery about a year and a half back, and they want to have checkups to make sure everything's going right. I can tell them everything's going right, but I'm retired. I figured, fuck it, I'll just go down there and see what they have to say. So I set up the appointment. My wife and I go down there last night or yesterday afternoon, and I check in, and they say, I said, what do you mean? It says, your insurance doesn't cover routine visits. And what do you mean? You guys did the cataract surgery. How could it not cover routine visits? Well, it just doesn't. And then I remembered back when I had my surgery, I needed to get an eye check first, and the same thing happened. For whatever reason, the insurance company, and I'll tell you who it is, it's UCare, wouldn't cover me just going in and getting an eye exam. Now, when they found out I needed a cataract surgery, they covered all that. That was fine. But the only way I could find out or verify that I needed cataract surgery is to have um, a screening or some kind of appointment for them to look at my eyes, something very basic. So I'm standing there in this lobby and they're saying, well, um, your insurance doesn't cover it. It's a standard checkup. So if you're going to do the checkup, it's $400. I said, what? No. The only reason I'm here is because you said you wanted me to come in and check. It's been a year and a half. My eyes are fine. I have no problems. I just thought, what the hell? I'll do this. But if this is going to cost me $400, I'm not going to do it. There's nothing wrong with me. And of course, the woman behind the counter, it's not her fault. She works for the doctor. She doesn't work for the insurance company. I said, well, young lady, here's the deal. In a short time, we're going to come to a point um, that insurance companies won't make choices and decisions as to our medical care, and I guess we'll have to wait till then. And she looks at me and she says, "Well, I hope you're right," because she understood the frustration here. And I said, "Oh, believe me, I fucking know it's going to happen. Come 2024, we're going to have a different guard running this country, and we are going to make some strides in our medical care." So I didn't get the checkup. I did go to Cracker Barrel. So I lose one, but I win the other. It worked out pretty well. Other thing I wanted to bring up, you notice if you watch the TikToks today, and if you happen to be watching on YouTube this podcast, I know some of you, a lot of you listen on just the audio, and that's fine. But for those of you that listen to the audio, you may want to check the video version of the podcast, at least the first part on YouTube. And I'll tell you why. One of my peers or followers on TikTok said they were going to send me a gift. I said, not necessary. You don't need to send me a gift. But he said, no, I want you to have this. And I said, sure. And I have a P.O. box. It's in the profile in my TikTok account. And he sent me the gift. Now, you never know what somebody's going to send you. I used to work at radio stations and people would send you some fucked up shit. Never had that problem with my time on TikTok or in the podcast, but he sent me this shirt. I have a different shirt on than when I was wearing earlier. And immediately I thought, oh God, I got to see this. It sounds interesting. He was pretty excited about it. So he sent me the shirt, didn't tell me what it said. I'm going to stand up and let you see it. We'll see what you think. I'll do it this way. See what that is? That is a black and white ominous picture of Jack Smith. And under it in red letters, it says FAFO. Now, if you listen to the show, you know what those letters mean. Fuck around and find out. What an awesome shirt. Haywood is the gentleman that sent this to me. And Haywood, I appreciate it. I will wear it with pride and I will get some shit for it. But you know me, I love pissing people off. So I have no problem with that. Again, if you normally listen in the audio, you will want to check the first part of the podcast on video on YouTube. It's easy to find. If you're on TikTok, go to my profile, hit the YouTube connection, or you can just go to rationalboomer.com. There's a bunch of links there, and you can go to the YouTube icon, and it will take you right to the YouTube podcast. Same podcast, one with video, one without video. Anyway, Haywood, thank you. Jack Smith, fuck around and find out. Ain't that the truth? So let's get down to getting. We'll start out with a couple of emails we have. The first one comes from Grandma Patty. And this one's regarding Texas and the idea that they want to secede from the Union because of this Supreme Court finding that the federal government has control over the Rio Grande River and they're cutting out those razor wire bullshit that's in the Rio Grande. Grandma Patty writes this: part of the contract they signed to become a state says they cannot secede. Period. If they want to change that contract, the U.S. government has to agree, and of course it won't. Besides, the repubes will go crazy if they have to give up those 40 electoral votes. I guess that means we're stuck with them. Yeah, I guess it does. But it's pretty hilarious watching these Texans lose their shit, the Trumplafuck Texans anyway. They're upset that Greg Abbott, the shitbag governor of the state of Texas, can't violate federal law by putting this razor wire and these floats in the Rio Grande River. I mean, who knew a governor can't violate that rule? Wow, who thought? Anyway, there are people complaining and whining and saying we're going to secede. Now, the interesting thing about them seceding, when they write this in their social media, apparently Texans don't spell too well because they don't write secede. The word secede is SECEDE, spelled correctly by Grandma Patty in her email to me. But of course, Texans, when they write it on social media, they write it as succeed. I guess some of these fucks fell through the cracks when it came to Texas education. But the funniest one I heard was somebody said they were ranting and raving about seceding and all of that sort of stuff. And they wanted to put an exclamation on the end of their rant. And they said, remember the Alamo. And I said to him, I said, well, funny, it seems to me that at the Alamo, you Texas motherfuckers lost. You got your ass kicked by the brown people down in Mexico. So you may want to rethink that. You may want to reread the history book, unless, of course, that's one of the books that you banned. And then, of course, you can't. So you're just fucking stupid. All right, the next one comes from Jin, Jin. Hi, Mike. Now that Biden beat Dean Phillips by a wide margin, I think he should suspend his campaign with dignity if he still has it. Also, Nikki Haley is staying in the GOP primary race. Hey, I don't like her, but I would like anybody who would make the orange-faced bastard spend the money and panic at the same time. Jen. You're absolutely right, Jen, and I couldn't agree more. And that brings us to the main story of what happened last night with regards to the New Hampshire primaries. In short, I will tell you this. The New Hampshire primary for the Republicans went pretty much the way they expected. Well, not quite the way they expected. Donald Trump did beat Nikki Haley um, by double digits. He did beat her by double digits, but not as badly as they thought he would. It was more like 12 or 13%. And then Joe Biden, he was a write-in candidate in New Hampshire, and that was interesting. We'll talk about that in a bit. Now, despite facing both federal and Georgia state prosecutions related to the coup attempt, you know what I'm talking about, Donald Trump nevertheless beat Nikki Haley in New Hampshire's primary yesterday, although by a much narrower margin that recent polls had suggested. Now, the former president had been leading Haley, his own United Nations ambassador, by 16 to 18 points in most of the recent polling. Exit poll results and early returns Tuesday evening indicate that the final margin will be considerably smaller. And at the last check that I saw before starting the podcast, it was like 12 or 13 points. Haley has for days insisted she would continue her campaign into South Carolina, where she was twice elected governor, regardless of the outcome in New Hampshire. Indeed, her staff has already said she will hold a rally in Charleston Wednesday night. Now, it's interesting. Nikki Haley went from saying she was going to win the New Hampshire primary to lowering the bar a little bit. She said, if I do better than I did in Iowa, then I'm going to keep going. Well, here's the deal, Nikki. In Iowa, you came in third. In New Hampshire, there's only two people running, so you will be in second place. That's better than Iowa, but Jesus, you're still behind by 13 points, 12 or 13 points. Now, for Trump, though, even a narrower than expected win is still a win, his second straight since the GOP primary contest began 8 days ago in the Iowa caucuses. Trump finished 30 points ahead of both Haley and Ron DeSantis, who a year earlier was beating Trump in both national and early state polls. But of course, we know Ron DeSantis is a horseshit candidate. He's weird, he's goofy, he's creepy, and that's why he lost. He was a horrible candidate. And let's be honest, Nikki Haley gives the appearance that she's normal, but she's not. We've discussed that before. But she's better than Ron DeSantis. She's better than Donald Trump, for that matter. But Donald Trump has the mouth-breathing, red meat-eating, Trump-la-fuck pieces of shit that will support him no matter what. Now, New Hampshire was the one state where Haley seemed competitive with Trump. In the next major contest, the primary in her home state of South Carolina, she trails Trump by an average 37 points. Now, even if that's off and it's only 30, that is still extremely wide margin. Trump also enjoys a massive lead in national polls, which will likely translate into big wins on Super Tuesday's 16 primaries and caucuses across the country on March 5th. Now, both of these polling leads, however, should shrink based on New Hampshire's results. So it should help her a little bit going into these things, but she's so far behind. I have no idea how she would have any kind of chance at all. Now, the Super Tuesday elections come one day after the scheduled start of the trial in Washington, D.C. on 4 felony charges related to his words and actions on January 6th. That's the interesting thing. Going to come one day after they start the trial in D.C. Now, we're still waiting to find out if Donald Trump has absolute immunity. Of course, he doesn't, and the appellate court will probably give us an answer on that sometime soon. It'll go to the Supreme Court, and they should probably suggest that they would not even take it on because it's fucking absolutely ridiculous. That might delay the start of that trial by a couple of weeks, at most, maybe a month. So now we're looking at April 4th. But never fear, because April 4th and a trial that's expected to go 2 months, we're still at June, well before the election, and Donald Trump will most certainly get convicted. Now, the interesting thing about this primary last night, there was a Democratic primary too. Now, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris had decided to pass on the New Hampshire primary and just go focus on South Carolina. They're out there together campaigning on abortion rights, and which is the right thing to do. That's the thing that's going to be strongest for them when they get to the general election. Anyway, Dean Phillips, this clown I told you about, who is my representative in the state of Minnesota, seems to think that he needs to run against Joe Biden, which I think is a waste of time and unnecessary complication to the whole process. It's either that he's working with the Republicans or he's fucking arrogant as hell. It could be both. I don't know. But anyway, Joe Biden was not on the ballot. Dean Phillips was on the ballot. A lot of pundits were saying, oh my God, Joe, this is going to be a problem. You should have put your name on the ballot. You're going to be embarrassed here. Not how it worked out. Not how it worked out, because Joe Biden was a write-in candidate. He received 69% of the Democratic vote. Dean Phillips received about 19%. Dean Phillips, who was on the ballot, Joe Biden, who was not. Dean Phillips got his ass kicked. And I don't know, Dean, can you take a hint? Can you fucking take a hint? You're out there campaigning and you can't pull 20%. Jesus Christ. So President Joe Biden won the Democratic primary in New Hampshire on Tuesday, basically securing a symbolic victory in spite of his absence from the ballot and the state's irrelevance to the official nominating process. Enough New Hampshireites wrote in Biden's name on the ballot for him to triumph over said Dean Phillips, a Democrat from Minnesota, and self-help author Marianne Williamson and 19 other contenders who took advantage of the ease which candidates can qualify for the presidential ballot in the Granite State. Now, the outcome meets the markers set by Biden's allies in the state, who mounted both a grassroots campaign, write him in, and ran a super PAC to advertise efforts to voters. A win is a win, Eric Jacobs, a veteran Democratic strategist advising New Hampshire write-in, the grassroots arm of it's called the Granite State write-in. The grassroots arm of the write-in campaign told Huffington Post at a write-in event in Dover on Sunday, if he wins his primary without even being on the ballot, that will be an impressive feat. It is an impressive feat. Far more impressive than Donald Trump beating Nikki Haley by 12 or 13%. Biden did not campaign in New Hampshire or appear on the ballot, in keeping with the Democratic National Committee's decision to punish the state for refusing to change the date of its Democratic presidential primary. Now, at Biden's direction, the DNC had made South Carolina a more racially diverse state and home to top Biden ally, Assistant Democratic leader Jim Clyburn, the first contest on the Democratic schedule. So they're not really going to get in the mix until South Carolina, about a month away. But New Hampshire's Republican-controlled state government refused to change the state law, codifying the state's first-in-the-nation status. It's not clear how differently a Democrat-controlled state government would have acted. New Hampshire Democrats remained furious about the DNC's decision as well. What you have to understand, New Hampshire, it's much like the situation in Iowa. They love you up until the caucus or the primary, whichever you have. And then after that, you never fucking see them again. So I wouldn't get too jacked up about it. Sure, it's a great thing that you're the first, but you understand what Joe Biden was doing and why he did it. Now, as a result, the DNC stripped the state of its convention delegates and threatened to punish any presidential candidates who campaigned there. With the Democratic primary slated to occur anyway, however, local Democrats erected a campaign to write Biden in and deliver him a victory in absentia. They saw an opportunity to show support for Biden and perhaps ingratiate themselves with the president enough to get him to restore their place in the primary schedule ahead of the 2028 nominating contest. It's in state statute that we're going to have the first in the nation primary, whether the DNC approves of it or not. Matt Wilhelm, Democratic leader in the New Hampshire State House of Representatives, at the write-in, he told that to Huffington Post at the write-in in Dover. And so we need to continue to make our case as a state that we've got a robust participation right now, that folks show up to vote and people want to be part of our democracy. And that's what's happened. Now, the DNC has said that they're going to punish any presidential candidate that runs in New Hampshire. And of course, Dean Phillips did that. So is Dean Phillips going to get punished? I would hope so. I really don't like this guy. As I say, he's a representative in Minnesota. He happens to be my representative. And for the life of me, I don't know what he's done since he's been in office. He's a rich guy that decided to run for political office. Name is Dean Phillips, and maybe you recognize his product. He makes Phillips vodka, which is a cheap-ass booze. It's, when you go buy rail stuff or cheap stuff in the liquor store, it's Phillips. And he got very wealthy off that. So he said, well, I'm going to be a congressman. And he did. But since he's been in Congress, I don't know what he's done. And now that he's done this, trying to complicate this situation for Joe Biden, I'm a little annoyed with him. I don't like him. And hopefully this situation will be enough to tell him that he should just go away. Now, Phillips said at a meet and greet in Hampton, New Hampshire, he said, I don't know about you. I think if you run for president, you should show up and face the voters and walk through the snow and see the press and answer questions and do debates and do town halls. Well, maybe you do, Dino. But apparently, 50% of the people voting don't give a fuck about that. 69% to his 19%. Now, Phillips' allies, including former presidential candidate Andrew Yang, argued that anything short of an 80% win for Biden should shake the confidence of the president, since the two previous incumbent Democratic presidents won at least that share of the vote. Yeah, but they were on the ballot. They campaigned in New Hampshire. Joe got 69% of the vote. Should Joe be upset about that? I don't think so. He was asked by a voter whether that was a fair comparison, since unlike his predecessors, Biden is not on the ballot. Yang responded by asking, and whose fault was that? Whose fault is that? Well, it's not Joe Biden's fault. The DNC decided not to use the New Hampshire primary, first and foremost, and said they would punish any presidential candidate that ran in that primary, like Dean Phillips. So whose fault is it? Joe Biden's just following the rules of his party. So why don't you just calm the fuck down a little bit? Now, we're still waiting for E. Jean Carroll's defamation of character lawsuit to start back up in New York. We know they shut it down for at least a day. It looks like it's going to be more than that because of a juror showing some symptoms of COVID. They shut it down. It didn't happen yesterday, and it looks like it's not going to happen today either. We don't know when it's going to start up or what's going to cause it to start back up. I don't know if the juror had COVID or what. Judge Lewis Kaplan called for another hold in E. Jean Carroll's defamation damages trial with former President Donald Trump. That was yesterday. I suppose it's possible they could start it today, but I doubt it. Now, Trump's lawyer, Alina Habba, told the court on Monday that she was exposed to COVID, which her parents have. A juror also called in sick. The court could ultimately decide to proceed with fewer jurors. They only need to have 6 to finish it out. They have a total of 9. So if we lose one, we're down to 8. We're all good. Now, Trump is expected to testify, but couldn't be in court on Tuesday because of the primary. Judge Kaplan paused the trial until Wednesday, but the illnesses may have motivated another hold till Thursday. See what I mean? It's supposed to start up today, but it probably won't until Thursday. We'll see what happens. Now, what's going to be interesting, they're giving their closing arguments, and then after that, the jury will deliberate and decide how much Donald Trump owes E. Jean Carroll. Remember, he's on the hook for $5 million from the first trial. She's asking for $10 million this time, but it's conceivable they will ask, or the jury will demand more. We'll see what happens. Now, the case has heard testimony from Carroll and marketing experts who testified to the cost of rebuilding her reputation after being torn down by Trump. I have to question whether she's going to be rebuilding anything. She's 80 years old. Take the money and run. That same day, Trump flooded his personal social media site with attacks on Carroll, once again defaming E. Jean Carroll, using her own words as an advice columnist to imply she was overly sexual and thus unworthy of damages in the case. It's the second time that Trump has attacked Carroll during the trial, including just hours before. Donald Trump will never learn. He is going to have to pay a large sum of money when they decide that in the next several days. Then, of course, Judge Engeron at some point in the next week, he said by the end of January, will come up with an even bigger figure in the Letitia James fraud lawsuit against Donald Trump, his company, and his family. We could be looking at a minimum of $370 million. It could be more than that. And when that happens, Donald Trump will be broke as a joke, a broke ass bitch, if you will. He doesn't have that kind of cash. Donald Trump is cash poor. This 10 million here, 5 million there. I hope they're getting the money put away ahead of time, because at some point, Donald Trump, well, the well is going to be dry. They're going to have to start selling off properties, and that's going to drive him nuts because he can't even control that. It's all in receivership. So somebody else, some third party, will be selling off his shit and maybe not selling it for the prices that Donald Trump thinks he should get. So we'll see what happens. The E. Jean Carroll case has not started up again. Doesn't look like it's going to start up again today, but probably tomorrow. As I say, what they're going to do is give their closing arguments. Then the jury will get time to deliberate. It could be very quick. It could take a week. Who knows? But ultimately, we're going to find out what Donald Trump now owes E. Jean Carroll. And he will probably continue to defame her. And there'll probably be another lawsuit. Well, get those lawsuits in quickly, because Donnie, as I say, is going to be broke as a motherfucking joke. What I'm really interested in seeing is if Donald Trump really does show up and testify in the closing arguments with E. Jean Carroll. It's funny what Donald Trump is doing with these moments in court. He's using it as his like campaign rallies. You know, he'd be having more rallies and doing more things and running more ads, but he doesn't have any money. All the money he's grifted for campaigns or whatever he's calling it, going to pay legal fees. And wow, these lawyers, I don't know if I'd pay them. Alina Habba, I don't know what he's paying her, but he's getting fucked over, and not in a good way. Donald Trump's paying Alina Habba. Donald Trump keeps losing cases. So when is he going to stop paying lawyers to lose cases for him? He's going to get very angry over the next week or 10 days because there's a lot of decisions that are going to come to pass. E. Jean Carroll, Letitia James, his absolute immunity appeal, that's going to be turned down. There's a lot of shit going on for Donald Trump, and it's not going to go well for him. He's going to lose at every turn, and he's going to be starting to lose his shit. You can already see he's kind of deteriorating. When he talks, he doesn't know what he's saying. He goes off on tangents, and he just looks fucking scattered. Well, that's going to get worse as this stuff piles on him and he gets more oppressed by all the shit hanging over his head. All right, we are going to take a quick break and we will be right back. Well, you probably noticed that I changed shirts. I got the shirt I was wearing today on, and I took off the white shirt um, that was sent to me that has the picture of Jack Smith, and it says FAFO, fuck around and find out. The reason I changed the shirt is because, well, I didn't want to get it dirty. And I get pretty worked up here. And besides the fact, I got this green shirt and I went to the trouble of finding a green hat to match it. I'm not much of a stylist, but Jesus Christ, why not take an opportunity when you can get it? You know, we've been talking a lot about the presidential primaries and the presidential race, but come 2024, there's a lot of other important down ballot races. And there's one in particular um, that is going on in California. It's for a Senate seat. You remember Dianne Feinstein or Feinstein. I always say it wrong. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. She's dead. Let it go. Anyway, she's passed away and now they got to fill that seat. And I've been troubled by um, this race because I can't help but think that we're going to lose one valuable member of the House of Representatives. See, Adam Schiff, I think that's what the establishment folks are hoping that he will win, and he'd be a great senator. But then the other person running is Katie Porter, who's also a wonderful candidate, would be a great senator. And I hate to lose either one of them in the House of Representatives. So anyway, they're running against each other with some other folks. One of those other folks is kind of interesting, kind of annoying, actually. Steve Garvey, a former professional baseball player for the Los Angeles Dodgers, is running for the Senate too in California as a Republican, a Trump humping piece of shit. And he got his ass waxed yesterday. It didn't go well for Steve Garvey. Now, let me just put it this way. Steve was he's a, I don't know, he's a Hall of Fame guy. He was a big star. He was a Dodger for so many years, and he's got to be at least 100. Steve, why don't you just take your money, relax, go to some tropical island, enjoy the remainder of your life? You don't need to stick your nose in this shit and try to be a Republican Trump humper who's going to win Senate election in California. It's not going to happen. And after yesterday's little debate, I think he's starting to get the message. Now, Politico reports that Garvey was repeatedly laughed at by people in the audience during Monday's debate as he refused to answer questions about whether he'd vote for former President Donald Trump in 2024. Well, if you refuse to answer that question, that tells me you are voting for Donald Trump. You're just afraid that it's going to hurt you. And you'd be right. It's going to hurt you. This is what he said. At that time, I will make my choice about voting for Trump, Garvey said when questioned directly, which led Democratic Katie Porter to quip, yeah, once a Dodger, always a Dodger. Fucking gotta love Katie Porter. Porter then added that this is not the minor leagues. Politico notes that Garvey suffered another brutal moment when he tried to discuss his interactions with homeless people in California, as he said that he touched them and listened to them. Democrat Barbara Lee, who was once herself homeless after leaving an abusive relationship, pounced on Garvey's remark. I've got to say, as someone who's been unsheltered, I cannot believe how he described his walk in touching, said Lee, whose remark prompted the audience to burst into laughter. Yeah, this isn't going well for Steve Garvey. You may want to look to another type of business. Garvey had another head scratching moment when he discussed how he came to decide on his policy positions. I knew I needed to explore California, he said. I needed to talk to the people. Policy for me is a position. I've taken strong positions, but once again, didn't answer the fucking question. This is the one thing that's kind of annoying to me. And it didn't start with Donald Trump, but it really got exacerbated with Donald Trump. Rich, famous people that want to run for politics or government positions, they think somehow they are the elite and they are somehow smart enough to be politicians. Well, Donald Trump himself proved he wasn't smart enough, even if he wasn't uh, a terrorist, a treasonist, an insurrectionist, a criminal, a corrupt piece of shit. Even if he wasn't all those things, he was not smart enough. Not smart enough to be president of the United States. Hell, he wasn't smart enough to be mayor of any small town. This guy doesn't care about people. He doesn't care about the community he represents. He only cares about himself. And because he only cares about himself, he gets nothing done but fills his pockets with people's money. And that doesn't go over too well with most reasonable folks. Now, Donald Trump made a celebratory speech in New Hampshire. And it took an awkward turn when he brought up how Senator Tim Scott politically threw Nikki Haley under the bus by stumping for him. I think we talked about this before, but Trump made it even more weird. After endorsing Trump days ago, Scott stood behind the former president in New Hampshire as he used his primary victory speech to trash Haley for not getting out of the race. Now, when Scott was invited to come up and speak, he declared the GOP primary a settled matter by proclaiming, "This election is over. It's time for the Republican Party to coalesce around our nominee and the next president of the United States, Donald Trump." You remember that speech? I don't know if you saw it, but he was trying to be an evangelical preacher. He was more animated than we ever saw him. And frankly, he looked fucking ridiculous. But as Trump continued bragging about his prospects for clinching the GOP nomination, he eventually turned back to Scott and brought up his extensive political history with the former South Carolina governor, Nikki Haley, including how she appointed him senator back in 2012 to fill the vacancy left behind by Jim DeMint. Yeah, that's right. The only reason he is a senator right now is that Nikki Haley appointed Tim Scott. Makes you question her decision making abilities, doesn't it? Now, Trump went on to say, "Did you ever think that she actually appointed you, Tim? And think of it, appointed you, and you're the senator of her state, and she endorsed me. You must really hate her." Nah, it's a shame. That's when Scott got up to the mic and declared, "I just love you, you piece of shit." You know, you get tired of these people constantly kissing Donald Trump's ass. And that's a fairly dangerous situation given the fact that we know that Donald Trump smells and he has a tendency to shit his pants. But Timmy, you'll do anything for a little notoriety and a little bit of power. Unfortunately, it's not going to work. And guess what? It's not going to be Nikki Haley that knocks you out of this shit. It's going to be Joe Biden. And Trump said to laughter and applause, "Well, that's why he's a great politician." Tim Scott's not a great politician. He's a goof. He's a weirdo along the lines of Ron DeSantis. He doesn't know how to interact with people, and people don't feel good about him when he does. But Tim Scott gets appointed. He becomes a senator because of Nikki Haley, and he has the audacity to support Donald Trump, who's going up against Nikki Haley. Donald Trump says he loves loyalty. You think he's going to look side-eyed at Tim Scott, given that Tim's loyalty is suspect? I don't know that Donald Trump's smart enough to do that, but I sure the fuck would look into it. Now, here's some interesting news that's surely going to piss Donald Trump off. A federal appeals court declined an effort Tuesday by former President Trump to have his challenge to a gag order in his election interference case heard by the full court, teeing up a likely Supreme Court battle over restrictions to his speech. Now, three-panel judge of the District of Columbia Circuit Court of Appeals had largely upheld a lower court ruling restricting Trump's speech in the case. The decision largely affirmed a prior ruling from Judge Tanya Chutkan, who barred Trump from making statements that target foreseeable witnesses, court staff, and prosecutors. The dreaded gag order. Chutkan gagged him, he appealed it, and of course he lost. Donald Trump always fucking loses. So now he'll probably send it to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court will probably do what the appeals court did and say, yeah, we're not even going to hear that. I can't imagine why they would and why it's even a deal now. We're getting closer to the actual trial, and Donald Trump doesn't shut up anyway. You can have a gag order if you're not willing to put the motherfucker in jail and hold him accountable. What difference does a gag order mean? Now, the appeals court refined that directive, barring Trump from any statements made with the intent to materially interfere with or to cause others to materially interfere with the course of the case. The D.C. Circuit's refusal to rehear the case is likely to bring the issue to the Supreme Court. Trump could petition the justices to review the gag order and also ask them to put it on hold in the meantime, which he will try to do. It's been on hold. I don't know if they'll do it again this time based on Donald Trump's behavior. I mean, he wants it on hold. If they put it on hold again, they're going to find out that he's going to do exactly the opposite of what he's being ordered to do in these decisions. Now, this is just one of multiple battles in Trump's many legal cases that have been headed toward the Supreme Court justices. Already, the Supreme Court took up an appeal of a ruling kicking him off Colorado's ballot under the 14th Amendment. Oral arguments are less than 3 weeks away there. Now, agreeing to review Trump's gag order, however, would mark the justice's first intervention in any of Trump's 4 criminal cases since he was charged. In D.C., Special Counsel Jack Smith charged Trump with 4 felonies, accusing him of conspiring to subvert the 2020 election. Of course, Donnie pled not guilty. The Supreme Court may also soon confront another battle in the case as to whether or not Trump has criminal immunity from official acts during his presidency. Well, he probably does of official acts, but when it comes to overthrowing the government, that just doesn't come up in the job description of being a president. The Supreme Court declined requests to leapfrog the normal appeals process to immediately decide Trump's immunity, which would have made it easier for Trump to go to trial earlier instead of allowing it to progress through the D.C. court. Now, we should be hearing from the D.C. court here any time. They had the final arguments, and they should be coming up with a decision maybe as quickly as this week, and then it'll get bumped up to the Supreme Court. So we'll see what happens. Now, the gag order battle has now completed that process, making the Supreme Court the next avenue for Trump to appeal. The Hill has reached out to Trump's legal team for comment. Of course, they aren't talking much. The circuit court panel took issue with Chutkan's use of the word target, fearing it would restrict Trump from responding to those who may be both witnesses in the case as well as campaign critics. Their standard, the judges wrote, allows the former president to continue to speak out about those same persons' books, articles, editorials, interviews, or political campaigns, as long as he does so in a manner that does not concern their roles as witnesses or the content of any expected testimony. That's pretty complex. And Donald Trump won't be able to comprehend that. So ultimately, Donald Trump will say whatever the fuck he wants. And then at some point, somebody has to hold him accountable. And finding him isn't going to work. We know that because of what we're seeing in the E. Jean Carroll case. They also removed Smith from the list of protected figures under Chutkan's order, freeing Trump to make more pointed statements about the top prosecutor in the case. But the bulk of the 68-page ruling backs Chutkin's rationale behind imposing a gag order, backing her conclusions that Trump's speech could disrupt the case, chill witness participation, and inspire real threats and intimidation for those involved in the case, while also concluding his candidate status does not outweigh the need to protect the trial. Now, the court found in their decision Mr. Trump's documented pattern of speech and its demonstrated real time, real world consequences poses a significant and imminent threat to the functioning of the criminal trial process in this case. The judge cited the torrent of threats and intimidations leveled at those Trump singled out by way of his supporters. Writing some messages are designed to generate alarm and dread. So at this point, the gag order is in place. It's conceivable he will appeal it to the Supreme Court and then ask for them to put a stay on the gag order. I don't know if the appellate court will do that or not. I hope they don't. I mean, it's like Donald Trump can get out of anything. Again, you can have these laws, you can have these rules, but if nobody is held accountable for it, they don't mean shit. So we'll see what the court does with this, and we'll see. Well, we won't see if Donald Trump will appeal it to the Supreme Court. Of course he will. That's what he always fucking does. We talked about Texas earlier and the razor wire in the Rio Grande and how the Supreme Court said, now you got to take that shit down, and how the Republicans in Texas are upset about it. Well, there's one Texan, Representative Chip Roy, a Republican from Texas. He's a weirdo motherfucker. He's a Trump humper. He's also the one that stood up in Congress and said, give me one thing I can go back to my constituents with to say we've done in the House of Representatives, basically suggesting the Republican Party hasn't done anything in the House, which is pretty much true. Anyway, Representative Roy called on Texas officials to ignore the recent Supreme Court ruling declaring the federal government could remove razor wire on the U.S.-Mexico border. Well, that's great. We have a member of the House of Representatives who is suggesting people should ignore rule of law. That's what kind of fuck you have representing you, Texas. He went on to say they have a duty under the Constitution and every other norm of leadership of any sovereign state to protect your citizens, period, full stop. There's no exception to that, Roy told Fox News. And if the Supreme Court wants to ignore that truth, which a slim majority did, Texas still had the duty. Texas leaders still have the duty to defend their people. Now, the final decision was a 5-4 Supreme Court decision. Allows the federal government to remove the razor wire on the border placed by Texas law enforcement. The government argued that wire legally prevented them from managing the border. As I said, this is federal jurisdiction. Shitbag Governor Greg Abbott is the one that wanted to put the razor wire up there. And so he's trying to supersede federal law, and frankly, a state can't do that. The conflict escalated earlier this month when Texas National Guard and Texas Department of Public Safety erected fences and razor wire in Eagle Pass, Texas, a popular spot for migrants to cross to the United States. Law enforcement prevents U.S. Border Patrol from accessing the area, which Border Patrol said prevented them from saving the life of a mother and 2 children who drowned in the Rio Grande River. Now, people are dying out here because of what the state of Texas is doing. I don't know. How can you possibly tell us that that is a reasonable or humanitarian thing to do? Now, Roy called the opinion from the court unconscionable and called for the state to ignore it in a post online. Texas lawmakers called on other members of Congress delegation to oppose funding to the Department of Homeland Security or any other entity facilitating this brazen violation of security and welfare of Texans. It's like if someone's breaking into your house and the court says, oh, sorry, you can't defend yourself. What do you tell the court, Roy said? You tell the court to go to hell. You defend yourself and then figure it out later. Well, that's good advice. Good idea, Chip. That's not going to go well for you. Haven't you guys fucked up enough? I mean, haven't you fucked up enough and paid the price? But no, they got to double down. They got to triple down. They got to quadruple down, no matter whether or not they're wrong. All right. Now, former President Donald Trump might have just given E. Jean Carroll's legal team yet more weapons in their defamation suit against him. It's coming from legal analyst Lisa Rubin, suggested on her social media account. Trump's remarks came shortly after he clinched a win against former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley in New Hampshire. Some have said the second state primary win was more narrow than the ex-president hoped for. Now, this is what he said. I don't get too angry, I get even. Tonight, celebrating his victory in New Hampshire and giving E. Jean Carroll's lawyers some more ammunition for cross-examination should he testify on the ongoing trial. Now, the fact of the matter is he's probably not going to testify. I know he said he is, but he's said he's going to testify before in many situations. He will probably sit there at the defense table and start spouting off like he did in Judge Engeron's court. And he'll get admonished for it, but nothing will happen to him because they don't hold Donald Trump accountable. Of course, we know Carroll alleges Trump raped her in a New York department store in the late 1900s, 1990s, 1900s. Trump's old. He's not that old. Trump has denied these claims, of course, and said that Carroll's fabricating all this. Now, the jury has already found Trump liable for sexual abuse and defamation. The current trial is purely about assessing additional damages, and that's what they're going to do. And they're probably going to do it in fairly quick order. They aren't going to take long to decide this. It's just a matter of how much money. And it almost doesn't matter because whatever comes out to be the number during the Letitia James thing, he's not going to have any money left anyway. He's going to be done. Absolutely fucking done. Now, one more thing about the primary. Now, Republicans moving to vote in the New Hampshire primary, where Trump is hoping to knock off his remaining competition, of course, Nikki Haley. There's some strikingly moderate policy positions according to exit polls, and it left CNN panels stunned. In particular, they argue these numbers could be an ominous sign for Trump's chances in the general election, even if he pulls through New Hampshire tonight, well, which of course he did. Gloria Borger said, "Can I just talk about abortion because I think it's so striking? This is 60% oppose a ban in New Hampshire. Only 27% favor it. It's what I've told you before. How do you win an election if 67 to 70% of the people are against overturning Roe v. Wade, and Donald Trump is sitting there saying, I did it, I'm proud of it, you can thank me for it? That's the one issue that's going to play the biggest role in the election in 2024's November election. And none of the other stuff even really has to happen, although it is, and that's just going to add to Donald Trump's problems. So Borger said, so here you have a Republican primary effectively, and you have this 67% number, and you have Joe Biden and Kamala Harris tonight talking about the repeal of Roe v. Wade. It is the one surefire issue. One of the surefire issues that Democrats have going into the next election, as I've said. And it's unclear how motivational it will be. But when you see a number like that, you have to assume it will be very motivational. It's worked in red states, Kansas, Ohio, agreed Burnett, the host of the program. And She went on and said, and listen, it also why Nikki Haley is a little more moderate than Donald Trump and sounds more moderate than Ron DeSantis as well, said one other co-panelist. It's shocking to me. We'll see if these numbers change. The immigration. 45% of these voters think the folks should offer a legal pathway here into this country. You know, Donald Trump wants to ride the immigration issue to the White House in the way he did in 2016. But it's pretty draconian as to what he wants to do and what the Republicans want to do. But the crazy thing about this is that's not what the vast majority of people in this country want to do. This is why I don't. This is why I don't understand why he's embracing this shit. If they know it's a loser, why would you continue to embrace it? Now, some people think that Donald Trump already knows he's going to lose. And he does what people like Donald Trump do. He puts out little hints so he doesn't look stupid, assuming he does lose. He always tries to cover his ass. Now, if Donald Trump fails to win back the White House come November 5th, it's only because it was rigged, he told a crowd Monday. It's what he did in 2020. He did it in 2016, too. He's trying to cover his ass. Well, I'm going to win, but if I don't win, clearly it's rigged. Now, on the eve of New Hampshire citizens heading to the ballot box to cast their vote for the GOP primary, Trump stood at the lectern in Laconia to give life back to a familiar refrain. If they win, we can't let them win, he told the crowd. And the only way they're going to win, in my opinion, is if they cheat. Because look at these crowds. They're spilling out. All over the building, we have people. And outside, we have hundreds of people. They can't get in. This was supposed to be a little stop. It's crazy. Now, the statement is one that the Huffington Post reporters, SV Date, posted on social media, suggesting that the president is bracing MAGA base to be vigilant for another rigged election. But here's the thing. What if Haley would have beat him last night? She didn't. But what if she did? Would he say that the Republicans are cheating against Donald Trump? I mean, that's all he could say. Or he could suggest that all these Democrats poured in and voted for Nikki Haley, which isn't true, which isn't legal. But he would try to spew that shit. And of course, a certain number of people would fucking believe it. But Trump is again setting up election lies, the tweet reads. Tells his rally audience the only way he can lose is if Democrats cheat. The last time he did this, he incited the insurrection, of course. Now, for the event, Trump brought to the stage former contenders like tech entrepreneur Vivek Ramaswamy, Tim Scott, and North Dakota Governor Doug Burgum. They brought up the topic of cheating several times. I can't lose, but if I do lose, they're cheating. Trump addressed it while he was insulting Joe Biden, of course. He said, we have a weak man that cheats like hell, he said. That's the only thing they're good at. They cheat at elections like maybe in third world countries. We're not going to let them cheat in 2024. Everybody's going to be watching. They're going to try. They're going to try because that's their natural instinct. So Donald Trump is trying to ready the crowd for his loss. I think he's smart enough to know that he doesn't have a fucking prayer and that maybe he thinks he can cloud the issue when he loses in 2024, except he's got a problem there because in 2024, it's not the same situation as in 2020. He's not the president. He doesn't have friends in the DOJ or people in Congress that can do his bidding. He's got people that are friends, but they're going to be under the microscope. Hell, they might even be indicted by that point. So they're not going to be much help. I mean, Donald Trump thinks he has as much power and as much influence as he did in 2020. I can tell you that he doesn't. All you have to do is look at the times he's been indicted, the times he's been in court. He's called out for people to support him, to come out. And you know what? They don't fucking come out. Nobody comes out because they're afraid. They think it's a setup. They think that they'll be put in jail. And they're right if they do the shit they did on January 6th. So Donald Trump doesn't have the pull he once did. Donald Trump is not going to pull a crowd to do anything crazy like he did on January 6th. He had everything going for him, he had every advantage, and he still failed. And when people tell me, oh, he's just going to do it again in 2024, he can't do what he did in 2024. He can't do what he did in 2020 and 2024 again. He doesn't have the power. He doesn't have the pull. He doesn't have the connections of the strings to pull. They don't exist anymore. And so far, these people that keep claiming that there's going to be a civil war, well, we have yet to see one, right? We're not going to see one. Donald Trump can't do it. All he's trying to do is scare Democrats, but it ain't working. This is the worst moment for bullies, when people aren't afraid of them anymore. And when they aren't afraid, they usually shrink away or bolt, run the fuck away. And that's what's going to happen with the Democrats, and that's what's going to happen with Donald Trump. All right, we are going to wrap up the Rational Boomer podcast. I want to thank you for taking the time out of your day to listen. Hope you have a great day, and we'll talk to you again tomorrow.